The Chancellor there, Rachel Reeves, responding to those figures regarding the economy growth figures at 0.1% in the last quarter of last year. Also talking more broadly about some of the work that the government is doing to try and improve the economy. Also referencing the interest rate cuts, 6 of them, she said they were all aiding that as well. But let's bring you just some breaking news now. At midday, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has given a response to the press coverage of his comments, and he has said that I am sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe, going on to say it is important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. So this is a response from Sir Jim Ratcliffe being brought to us by the Reuters news agency, saying that I am sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe, and that it's important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. This follows comments that he said that Britain was being colonised by immigrants who are draining resources from the state. That was Sir Jim Ratcliffe speaking to our data and economics editor, Ed Conway. Sir Jim is the founder of Inos, the chemical group, part owner, of course, of Manchester United as well. And he was warning, in his words, that the Britain faced kind of profound political, social and economic challenges. Well, in response to that, there was criticism from people like Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester. There was criticism from Sir Keir Starmer, criticism from the Green Party too, across the board. Let's bring in our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, for more on this. And Rob, we're just seeing these comments from Sir Jim, saying that he was apologetic that his choice of language had offended some people in both the UK and Europe.
Well, many Manchester United fans certainly offended. The Muslim supporters group deeply concerned about the offence caused by saying that the UK has been colonised by immigrants. And it's particularly the word colonise has obviously sparked a concern, the dehumanising language used, and very much at odds with Manchester United as a club, the team with more than a dozen foreign players in the men's team alone, so many staff from diverse communities. And clearly, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, recognising the Sky News interview with Ed Conway, has caused offence, and reacting to what is a political storm that has been created by this. And, you know, the Football Association as well, it's something it's now been reported they're looking into, given the fact that Jim Ratcliffe is a co-owner of Manchester United. And interestingly, in this statement, while Sir Jim Ratcliffe does say that he is sorry for his choice of language and saying it has offended some people, he does still talk about the need politically to challenge, to take on the immigration issue. And it is not a caveated apology, the fact he does recognise it has caused offence. But Sir Jim does emphasise that he wants governments to manage the migration issue. In the interview as well, complaining about the cost on the benefits as well, with so many people in terms of the enlarged population caused by immigration. But certainly, last night we were hearing very quickly from football's anti-discrimination body, Kick It Out, concerned by what he'd said to Ed Conway, and the extent of the offence caused amongst Manchester United fans as well. If we think back to what he said, show racism and race red cards, that they were deeply concerned by his comments. Also, we heard from Kick It Out, who called his comments disgraceful. They said this language and leadership has no place in English football. So it'd be interesting now to see just how fans and the anti-racism bodies in football do respond to the fact that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has now apologised for the offence caused by his comments.
Rob, let's just read the full statement from Sir Jim in response to the comments. This was posted on the Inos website. And Sir Jim says, I'm sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe and caused concern, but it's important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. My comments were made while answering questions about UK policy at the European Industry Summit in Antwerp, where I was discussing the importance of economic growth, job skills and manufacturing in the UK. My intention was to stress that governments must manage migration alongside investment in skills, industry and jobs so that long-term prosperity is shared by everyone. It is critical that we maintain an open debate on the challenges facing the UK. So that was his statement. Let's also just bring you some reaction from the Football Association, which says it will examine whether Manchester United co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe's comments about immigrants have brought the game into disrepute. That's according to a statement that the Press Association has received. So despite that apology, Rob, from Sir Jim, investigations potentially from the FA now.
Yes, Football Association speaking while at the UEFA Congress in Brussels, I imagine quite a big gathering of European football leaders, and questions whether or not he has brought the game into disrepute, not by talking about political matters, but particular focus on the word colonising, that impression given that people are coming here to somehow take control of the country, and reference to the fact, there is concern somehow that the white displacement trope is being propagated here with the use of the word colonising in relation to immigration. We have seen the varied reaction. Sir Jim Ratcliffe had met recently with the Reform leader Nigel Farage, who has welcomed Sir Jim Ratcliffe for actually discussing this publicly. And, we heard from Sir Jim in the interview about his impressions of meeting with Nigel Farage, who had said that he... in reference to the interview, saying that Britain has undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many areas in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but reform won't. That was in response to the Prime Minister's condemnation of the interview, when he very much was expressing his concern about the intervention by Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But this is a clear apology. The Football Association does often act on individuals in football and pursue action even if they have issued an apology. So where this goes now will be something that they're looking into. It is not a Football Association investigation at this stage. It is something they are looking into. But to set the background to this, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is now running Manchester United on a day-to-day basis. He bought a stake of just under 30% from the owning Glazer family 2 years ago, and that gave him as well operational control of football matters and how the business is being run, and very much is also overseeing plans for a new stadium to replace Old Trafford. There's an Old Trafford regeneration project with Sir Jim working alongside the Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, who told him to withdraw those comments this morning. So it comes at a time when Sir Jim is needing public investment in the wider project to rebuild Old Trafford on a site nearby, something that will cost several £billion. And we'd already had Manchester United fans protesting against his running of the club in recent times, particularly actually over staff cuts within Manchester United. Many of those staff who will be from a diverse background. We've not heard anything from actually the club themselves. Obviously, the fact that ultimately it's Sir Jim Ratcliffe running things, so that might be highly unusual to hear from them. Also, no press conference this week due from Michael Carrick, the manager. The men's team not playing this weekend. The women's team are in action at Atletico Madrid in the Women's Champions League tonight. But clearly, Sir Jim Ratcliffe recognising that he has sparked a political furore and is trying to diffuse this row with the Prime Minister lined up against him, condemning his comments. The fact that Sir Jim has said that he is sorry for his choice of language and the offence it has caused, while still very much wanting to use his platform to speak about his concerns about immigration numbers into the country. It is interesting to watch perhaps how he's shifting politically. There was an interview I did with Sir Jim Ratcliffe in 2024 when he indicated his displeasure with how things had gone under the Conservatives and perhaps was moving towards Labour. Just days later, the election was called, with eventually Labour coming to power. Now, obviously, at a time when Reform are leading in the polls, Sir Jim has indicated his embrace to some degree of Nigel Farage and Reform. And Sir Jim is about much more than Manchester United. It's given him this sort of very visual business face now, but his billions run through the petrochemicals industry, through Inos. He's got plants throughout the country. He has business interests there to promote and to lobby on behalf of. So certainly one of the most prominent British businessmen, one of the wealthiest Brits. But, of course, questions have been raised about him offering his view on Britain and migration to Britain while he is now based in Monaco.
Rob Harris there. Good to have you with us. Thank you. We'll get on to some of the political reaction that Rob was referencing in a couple of moments' time. But first, I want to take you back to what we heard from Sir Jim. Let's just remind you what he said to Ed Conway, our data and economics editor, yesterday evening.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular. And show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but it's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment, I don't think the economy is in a good... You can't afford... you can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause...
It's been colonised?
It'll cause... Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be my view.
Was Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Let's bring in our business and economics correspondent, Paul Kelso, because, Paul, you've been speaking to the Chancellor in the last few moments, and she's been reacting too.
Yes, the Chancellor of the Exchequer ostensibly here at BT Openreach facility in Crawley to talk about the growth figures released today, but inevitably questions given Sir Jim Ratcliffe's status, his comments, the Prime Minister's reaction to them, but his status particularly as a very important business figure. Many people will know him primarily for his role as co-owner of Manchester United, but his control of Inos is economically certainly far more significant in the UK. Something over around 3,500 people work for Inos. It's an oil and gas, petrochemicals, an infrastructure company. It owns a chemicals plant at Grangemouth in Scotland. It owns a lot of the North Sea pipelines that deliver oil and gas from the fields to the shore and to refineries. And he is a regular lobbyer of the British government for financial support to help his businesses. It's a heavily indebted group, Ineos. It has huge debts, and he has argued for a long time that the environment in the UK is working against industries like his. He wants lower energy prices. He wants public support for his businesses. In fact, earlier this year, he achieved just that. Rachel Reeves travelled to Grangemouth to announce a package of support of more than £100 million into his chemicals plant at Grangemouth to help it going. There's a second facility that produces salt in the northwest of England. Our economics editor, our colleague Ed Conway, who conducted that interview, he's highlighted the challenges there. Ineos want more public money from the Chancellor. So the opportunity this morning I had was to ask her whether that support, that public money, was conditional on an apology, or whether they were frankly happy to still keep giving money to a man who runs these businesses despite views that the Prime Minister thinks are abhorrent. This is what he said.
Investment in Grangemouth is to support jobs in Grangemouth and support vital industries in Scotland and in the UK. But what Jim Ratcliffe said was unacceptable. It was disgusting, frankly, and he should apologise for his remarks. But I'm not going to let what Jim Ratcliffe has said determine the future of jobs in Scotland. It is really important that we invest in our industrial base in Scotland and right across the UK. Look, Jim Ratcliffe can speak for himself, but the comments that he made yesterday were unacceptable. Our country benefits hugely from its diversity. We see that in our businesses, we see that in our universities, we see that in our cultural life, and we are richer because of the diversity of our country. So I would urge him to apologise for his offensive remarks, which have upset a lot of people, and just frankly do not represent I think, the views in modern Britain today.
So the Chancellor there suggesting that Sir Jim Ratcliffe should apologise. Well, we now have an apology of sorts, as you've been reporting in the last few minutes, although reading the statement issued by Inos on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's behalf this morning, he is apologising if people took offence, some Europeans and in the UK who may have taken offence at his remarks. He's not apologising for making them, particularly for the use of the word colonising, which is just inaccurate, isn't it? To colonise means to come to a country and take over, to displace the indigenous people and run the country. That, by whatever your views of migration, controlled or otherwise, to the UK is not an accurate reflection of the state of migration in the UK, and he's unapologetic about raising it. Indeed, the fact he was talking to Sky News yesterday at all was in the context, as he says in his statement, of a conference at which he was discussing the business environment, and he's long had very, very clear views, not just about the UK business environment, but the European business environment, particularly the issue of energy prices. The UK does have the highest industrial energy prices in the developed world, and pretty much the highest domestic prices too, as people will know. Now, that's a big issue if you are an industrialist like Sir Jim Ratcliffe. You are running energy-intensive industries, and he has been very clear for a long time that he wants government to act to bring down those prices. But many will look at that position and ally it to the fact he also wants direct government support and has received it. The Chancellor there unapologetic about handing Inos money, saying it's about defending and protecting the jobs that there are in Grangemouth, and it's something the government does in many industries. It's had to do in industries. One thinks of the steel industry, regularly, routinely assisted by public money because of the challenges of running big industrial processes in European nations and the UK, when frankly it is a great deal cheaper to do it elsewhere in the world. So that's the context of these comments. It's why, frankly, Sir Jim Ratcliffe gets a hearing. It's not just the fact he owns Manchester United, which of course captures the attention of millions of people around the world, but frankly he provides jobs in the UK. It's why he gets a seat at the table, and perhaps why the Chancellor was cautious to try and separate his words, the offence caused to the Prime Minister and to her. I mean, she called it disgusting, didn't she? Separate that from the nuts and bolts of a deal the government has done. And another one it will be asked to do by Ineos, its salt refining plant in Runcorn that Sky News has visited just recently, is asking for direct money to help overhaul its processes there so that continue to make such an important product in chemical processes in the UK. If there's been a decline, a massive decline in industrial chemical production in the UK, and that request, as we understand it, is if not sitting on Business Secretary Peter Kyle's desk, it is close to it. It is a live question. Ineos wants public support. Perhaps that's one of the factors in Sir Jim Ratcliffe's partial retreat this morning from his position, his words to Ed Conway, which came at the end of a lengthy interview in which he discussed many of these issues. But of course, the inflammatory nature of the language, highly contested by many, meant that attention inevitably moved to that. And certainly the Prime Minister's attention, he was quick to jump on it and demand an apology. That has come, albeit a partial apology, and then those issues around when and how much more government support will go to Ineos will follow. It should be said, Ineos is a company that has challenges across the board. It's got its sporting investments, not just in football, but in cycling. It's the main title sponsor of what was a successful cycling team but has struggled in recent years. It makes the Ineos Grenadier car sort of successor to the Land Rover. There have been layoffs announced at the back end of last year there as it has attempted to deal with the industrial challenges in the car market, tariffs particularly, and more broadly the chemicals and infrastructure group, the oil and gas group. It has a great deal of debt that it is looking to address. So Sir Jim Ratcliffe has got a lot on his plate. He runs that empire largely from Monaco. The Chancellor didn't want to be drawn on the validity of criticism of government policy from a tax exile who is happy to run businesses here but not to live here. But he has got a lot on his plate. But he is a man who we have seen is very happy to wade in to the public debate, and governments listen to him because he employs a lot of people here.
Paul Kelso, good to have you with us. Paul, thank you so much. We will get some breaking reaction, I'm sure, from Downing Street shortly on the apology. We'll bring that to you as soon as we can, the exact details of it. But in the meantime, we have had some prior political reaction. This is the response from the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Writing on social media earlier, he said this: "These comments go against everything for which Manchester has traditionally stood, a place where people of all races, faiths and none have pulled together over centuries to build our city. Calling for curbs on levels of immigration is one thing. Portraying those who come here as a hostile invading force is quite another. It's inaccurate, insulting, inflammatory and should be withdrawn." Meanwhile, the Reform UK leader, Nigel Farage, said this: "Britain's undergone unprecedented mass immigration that has changed the character of many places in our country. Labour may try to ignore that, but Reform won't." Well, away from politics, we've also had reaction from the world of football. The football charity Kick It Out said Sir Jim Ratcliffe's comments are disgraceful and deeply divisive at a time when football does so much to bring communities together. And Show Racism the Red Card said it was deeply concerned by Sir Jim's comments, writing, "Language of this kind echoes narratives that have historically been used to stigmatise migrant communities, fuel division and legitimise hostility towards minority groups." Let's just bring in Rob Harris now, our sports correspondent who's in the newsroom for us. And Rob, we talked about this a little earlier in the hour, but Sky News understands that the FA are aware that they are taking a look at the comments made by Jim Ratcliffe. What would we understand that process to look like?
Well, the Football Association will be looking at whether or not Sir Jim Ratcliffe's comments have brought the game into disrepute. Does it breach any of their regulations around discriminatory language? Not on the actual discussion of immigration itself. And yeah, it is more of a sort of wider issue that the FA are looking into about whether or not Sir Jim Ratcliffe has brought the game into disrepute. It's not an investigation at this stage, and it's two separate things, I would say, from this. There is a widespread political discussion about immigration numbers, but it is the focus on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's use of the word colonising and the implication that brings, as we've heard from Andy Burnham and others, and about whether or not it's implying somehow foreign people coming to this country are trying to take over, trying to be some force that displaces people. And, you know, we've been hearing from the Prime Minister's official spokesperson as well, again saying that Sir Keir Starmer believes that the comments were wrong and Britain is a proud, diverse country. And while there should be a serious debate on immigration, these are inflammatory and divisive comments. And, you know, there is alarm from football fans, from Manchester United fans. The Muslim Supporters Club at Manchester United said that there's a risk of legitimising prejudice and deepening division. And they said they're deeply concerned by his comments to Ed Conway. And, you know, the fans group called for leadership that unites rather than divides. And there has been, from the anti-racism bodies in football, deep concern about Sir Jim Ratcliffe's use of these comments, the fact he has said that the UK, as he believes it, has been colonised by immigrants. So the Football Association now needing to assess whether Sir Jim Ratcliffe has broken any of their regulations. The fact he is the part owner of Manchester United, but running things on a day-to-day basis, as he has been for 2 years since Inos gained control of a stake around 30% in Manchester United. And if we repeat that reaction now from Sir Jim Ratcliffe, despite all the expressions of concern last night, it's taken more than 12 hours or so to say that I am sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe and caused concern. So that is a partial apology, because he then goes on to still say, but it is important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. So he's talking about how it's offended some people, no recognition of the concern created amongst the Manchester United fans, a club that has a diverse workforce, the playing squad, the off-field staff as well. And Manchester United's own website celebrates the diversity, particularly of Manchester, a city that's grown through migration from across the world. It very much, his comments were at odds with the ideals that are promoted not only by Manchester United, but also by the Premier League as well. So now we'll see what the response will be from those in football. The fact Sir Jim Ratcliffe has offered a partial apology, not completely withdrawing his statement in saying that the UK has been colonised by immigrants.
Rob Harris live in the newsroom for us. Thank you so much. Let's take you to Downing Street, shall we, and bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell. Rob, reaction from Number 10 again.
Yes, and actually that apology, or maybe half apology from Jim Ratcliffe, came in when we were sat in the lobby briefing with the Prime Minister's official spokesperson just up the way from Number 10 in Number 9 Downing Street. And you got a sense that I think Downing Street were pretty pleased that that apology had come through. The spokesperson pointed out to all the reporters there that it had come in, essentially said the Prime Minister had asked for an apology from Jim Ratcliffe, and now he had got one. Now, it was pointed out to the Prime Minister's spokesperson that actually it might not be a full-throated apology. This is appears to be apologising for the offence caused, but saying that basically the point that he was making was a valid one. But he sort of batted that away and said, look, the Prime Minister has called for an apology and now he has got one. Asked if it was all forgiven now, he simply said that it was right to apologise. We did get, though, a repeat from the Number 10 team of the pretty punchy language that Keir Starmer has waged towards Jim Ratcliffe. The Prime Minister's spokesperson said that the comments were offensive and wrong, that they were inflammatory and divisive, that the Prime Minister has spoken about the importance of integration, that it's right to have a reasonable debate about migration, but that Jim Ratcliffe's figures that he'd cited relating to the population data were just wrong, that it was inflammatory, inaccurate and wrong, and that he should apologise. Now, we pressed the spokesperson as well on whether these comments will have any tangible impact, if you like, on the Prime Minister and the government's dealings with Jim Ratcliffe or any of his associated interests and companies. We know that Jim Ratcliffe has been looking at trying to get public investment and help around Manchester as part of the renovation project there, not necessarily in the stadium, but in the infrastructure around it. And the spokesperson made very clear that they see this as two separate things, that basically this row over the language and the comments Jim Ratcliffe made won't necessarily bleed across into any practical political impact. So I take from that that they are still willing to work with Jim Ratcliffe on certain elements, certain projects, but that they are not afraid, essentially, in calling out and condemning this language, but that I think this apology may have gone some way in sort of healing divisions, if you like, with Keir Starmer and with the Prime Minister's team.
Rob Powell in Downing Street, stay with us for a few moments, because we've also had reaction from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who's called the comments disgraceful. He was speaking before Jim Ratcliffe issued the apology, but let's take a listen.
I think Jim Ratcliffe's comments are absolutely disgraceful. When you look at this city, this country, actually this National Health Service that was born right here at Trafford Hospital, people have come from around the world to contribute to Britain's success. We see that with students in our universities. We see it with staff in our health and care services. It's one of the things that makes Britain great. And in Gorton and Denton, voters have got a chance to vote for the politics of hope with Labour and to reject the politics of reform whose candidate is backed by Tommy Robinson. We know we've got to bring levels of migration down in this country. This government is doing that, but we shouldn't also turn our backs on or downplay the contribution that people from around the world have made and continue to make to this country's success. I'm proud of the workers from overseas who come and work in our health and social care services. Farage says go home. As this country's health and social care secretary, I say to those people, you are home, and I'm really grateful for what they do for our health and care services.
That was the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, Rob, and referencing reform there, and there was a different point of view put forward by the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, kind of reflecting maybe some of the wider views that Jim Ratcliffe would now be saying that he was trying to talk about, maybe in language that he shouldn't have used.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting quite how forthright the Prime Minister and the government are being in sort of taking on Jim Ratcliffe's intervention here. Because I have to admit, I was quite surprised when I saw Keir Starmer's post online last night. It's maybe the type of fight that he doesn't necessarily need to have. It's the type of interview, the type of comment that I could imagine sitting in that press briefing room with the number 10 team, asking for comments on it and getting very little back from the Prime Minister's team, other than maybe a restatement of their own position. So I wonder whether we can read into the fact that the Prime Minister's been more forthright about this, that he is making the case for migration more forthrightly, that he is making and taking on comments that there will be many within his party that find very, very deeply offensive and would probably be somewhat perturbed if they didn't see their party leader and the Prime Minister taking these comments on. So there's a difficulty here that you're trying to sort of read the tea leaves, and they might just be tea leaves, but I do wonder whether the events of the last week that have weakened the Prime Minister and put him in a difficult place, the restart that number 10 and the team is going through, the calls to essentially be more forthright and make a sort of centre-left argument a bit more vocally about whether that might be playing in to some of these quite punchy comments that we have had from Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister. And if you had wound back 3 months, maybe the concern about alienating people that might go to reform, maybe that would have got the better of them and they might have pulled back from being quite so spiky about this.
Rob Powell, live in Downing Street for us. Thank you so much. We did just hear from Wes Streeting a short while ago. He referenced the upcoming by-election in Gaunton and Denton. Let's just take a few moments to remind you of the candidates that are standing in that by-election. There's a fair few of them, so let's just spool through the various people that are up for that by-election up in Manchester. Let's just remind you of the comments that were made by Jim Ratcliffe in that interview with our data and economics editor, Ed Conway. They were speaking in Antwerp. Let's take a listen.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular and show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but it's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment I don't think the economy is in a good. You can't afford. You can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits, and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause. It'll cause. Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million. That's 12 million people.
You met recently with Nigel Farage, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be mine. view.
Let's bring in Ed, who was talking to Jim Ratcliffe. And Ed, I'm just, looking at the statement that Jim Ratcliffe put out a few moments ago, saying that the comments were made while answering questions about UK policy at an industry summit in Antwerp. That's what you were there to talk about with Jim Ratcliffe, one of the richest people in the UK. But that interview took a different turn. Just talk to us about that conversation and kind of your reaction to those comments when you made them.
We were there to talk about the state of the chemical sector, and this is something, a lot of people, obviously, for many people, Jim Ratcliffe is famous as one of the owners of Manchester United. But for a long time, he was a relatively obscure character within the world of chemicals. Very, very successful, the most successful chemicals entrepreneur in the UK and to some extent in Europe. And the chemical sector is having a really tough time at the moment. And we, as you know, we've been covering that in recent months. And it is a big story that I happen to think is kind of pretty important. And so that's really why we wanted to talk to him. And we did actually for I think getting on for 8 minutes of that interview preceding the part that you've just seen. We talked about that, and we talked about the fact that he said that right now the European chemical sector is facing what he calls an unsurvivable situation. So to me, that's pretty a big deal. And then I asked him about the UK economy, and I asked him about, to some extent, about whether the government is taking the right course on it. And then you saw what he said, and it was really, it's that choice of word. It's the choice of word, colonised, that I found surprising, I found shocking at the time, and asked him whether he really meant that, as you can see, and then he kind of confirmed that he did. And so it was not, dare I say, the story that I expected to be reporting on yesterday. But this is what he said, and I think we don't often have these opportunities for quite, relatively lengthy interview. It's about 15 minutes. I mean, actually, at the point that we were I was asking those questions about UK economy, they were trying to kind of wind it up. It's not often we have that opportunity to get an insight into what he's thinking, because he's relatively reclusive when it comes to his engagement with the press. And he is a man of great influence. He was part of the debate going into Brexit. He was proud to be a Brexiter. He was part of the debate ahead of the last election on whether Keir Starmer was ready to take over as Prime Minister, and he kind of gave his endorsement. And so the fact that he has made these comments is telling, and it is, let's just say, it's an insight into what he's thinking. And the fact that he has apologised, I mean, given the weight of commentary there'd been after this interview, including from the Prime Minister saying he needed to apologise, clearly he had to say something. He's not going to come out and do another TV interview, as far as I can gather, after that. But he was going to say something. But whether, reading that, and you read the text of it a moment ago, Gareth, whether reading that apology, people will read that and think that's a full-throated apology saying the choice of word colonised is just not the right choice of word. I think that's a matter for debate, because, I mean, he said, I'm sorry that my choice of language has offended some people. Is that a real apology, or is that just saying that he's sorry that some people have been offended? I mean, that's another conversation. But yeah, a really unexpected turn of events, and clearly it has struck off a lot of debate elsewhere, well beyond chemicals, let's say.
And of course, it's not just chemicals at the heart of his business operation, but also Manchester United. And that is a team whose success is built in part upon the diversity of the players in the squad. And so there are surely many within kind of the Jim Ratcliffe empire who will be looking at their boss and going, well, hang on a second, what do you make of me?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can see that. I mean, you can see that British football has been built on having the best players from around the world. That's the entire point of the Premier League. And then, to some extent, when you kind of zoom out and look at the UK economy, that really has been part of the attitude that British politicians have had for a long time. There's this idea that goes back to the 1980s. It's called Wimbledonization. We may not have the best tennis players. We had somebody who won Wimbledon not that long ago, Andy Murray. But we may not have the best tennis players, but we do want to have the best tournament, and we want to have the best players from around the world playing here. And the idea of that, Wimbledonization, you heard that phrase when it came to the city, when it came to the financial sector, when it came to getting the best people from all around the world to be part of this economy, OK? And so what has happened, the situation of the Premier League is kind of, to some extent, a kind of mirror to the rest of the UK, which is that there's been this attitude that having more people, having the best and the brightest from around the world to come and study here, to work here, is a good thing. And I think that is the counterpoint to what Jim Ratcliffe has said. And doubtless, that is part of why I think a lot of people, particularly within the footballing community, who like having the best players in the world to come here, are shocked by this. That being said, I spent a lot of time looking at the immigration numbers, okay? And if you look, and this is really important, if you look at the flows of migration into the country in the last few years, they have been totally unprecedented. Totally unprecedented. And that's just not illegal migration. That's not just the boats coming over. That's totally dwarfed by the legal migration coming in. But here's what's crucial about this, okay? We are now starting to see that come off. And in the coming years, in just the same way that we had record levels of net migration coming into the country in recent years, we are likely in the coming years to have net emigration. So people leaving the country. And why is that happening? It's happening because we're not being colonised. It's happening because a lot of those people, primarily from India and China, many of them students, came over to the UK, worked and indeed studied here for a few years, and are now going back. And so the idea, I think, that it is a full-blown, that choice of word, colonisation, that, is kind of striking and shocking, for me at least, when I heard that for the first time yesterday. That choice of word might also just be straightforwardly wrong when you look at the data, which is what, I would prefer to do. And so, doubtless, there is really high migration into the UK, totally unprecedented in recent years. But does that actually equate to colonisation? That is not in any way clear from the actual data, because it looks like many of those people are now starting to leave the country.
And I'm sure if we had a historian here with us, Ed, they would say, well, many of the countries that are the greatest number of migrants to the UK are Commonwealth nations, and they are relationships that are built off the back of the United Kingdom colonising those nations.
Yeah, and Britain has a history of colonisation. That is something with the British Empire that we have to wrestle with, and we continue to wrestle with for some time. And there's the long-standing debate as to the extent to which the UK has managed the post-colonial period well or badly. I mean, some people would say, compared with other colonial nations, Belgium is a pretty good example. The UK stands up relatively well, but this is not, in many respects, there are many things to be not very proud of when it comes to our history, and colonisation definitely falls within that kind of iffy part of our history. So to use that word, which is definitely a word that is a fragile and sensitive word about the situation that we're in right now, it's not surprising that that has offended so many people. And I think the question now is whether Sir Jim Ratcliffe's apology, to the extent that it's an apology, satisfies everyone from the Prime Minister. I think the Prime Minister has said that he's glad that Jim Ratcliffe has apologised. But as I say, a lot of people will look at the apology and say, well, how much of a full-hearted apology is that? Maybe not. He's not retracting that word. He's just saying that it's sorry that he has offended people with it.
Ed Conway joining us live in the newsroom. Good to have you with us. Appreciated. Let's just show you what Sir Jim had to say in that apology. I'm sorry that my choice of language offended some people in the UK and Europe and caused concern, but it is important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. My comments were made while answering questions about UK policy at the European Industry Summit in Antwerp, where I was discussing the importance of economic growth, job skills and manufacturing in the UK. My intention was to stress that governments must manage migration alongside investment in skills, industry and jobs so that long-term prosperity is shared by everyone. It is critical that we maintain an open debate on the challenges facing the UK. Well, let's discuss further with Jamie Jackson, Manchester football writer at The Guardian. Jamie, good to see you. What do you make of what's happened over the last 24 hours?
Well, first of all, Ratcliffe's put his foot in his mouth, I'd suggest. Comments completely odd, I'm being polite. It's interesting what Ed says there, and I agree with him. The apology, imagine if he turned around today and said, you know what, I'm sorry for actually my thought process here, I've got this wrong. Immigrants add to our economic base, they add to our vibrant society. I'm part owner of a football club in which the squad is filled with amazing footballers from all around the world, kind of built on that, our Premier League is. And then, broadening it out, just like Manchester, the town, the city. But instead, he's sort of the old apology, which is, I'm sorry if some people have been offended, which for me is a bit of a non-starter of an apology. I just wonder whether he's been pragmatic here, because he needs sort of public money for this regeneration of the wider Old Trafford sort of stadium area. Yes, and obviously, you know, Sir Keir Starmer's asked him to apologise. So, listen, it's good that he's done this, but I don't know. There's what you do and there's sort of what you say, and it's unfortunate. And again, I'm being polite.
Just looking at some of the nationalities that make up the squad that he co-owns, Argentine, Belgium, Brazil, Cameroon, Denmark, France, Morocco, the Netherlands, Slovenia, you know, the list goes on. It's indicative of the multiculturalism of the United Kingdom and of the sport that he's invested into. And I'm sure his wider petrochemical business probably has an even longer list of nationalities that work within and for him. And you kind of talk about the situation, the wider regeneration around Old Trafford, which everybody says is vitally needed, both in the stadium and the wider environs. And we saw that response from Andy Burnham as well, saying this is not Manchester. With a mind to Manchester itself, what do you think people's response, this community's response will be, and thoughts and feelings will be to some of the conversation that's been had in the last kind of day or so?
Yeah, they won't be happy. I mean, that area we're talking about around Old Trafford, I guarantee, is multicultural by definition. You know, it's our second or third largest city, Manchester, and that area, as I say, is diverse. And so you just wonder who exactly these comments were aimed for, the original ones, or who he thought he would be pleasing. Is it Nigel Farage? I mean, he seems to be a big fan of Nigel Farage, and, you know, we could have a different debate about his politics, but, you know, they're certainly not in line with a kind of, how can I say this, multicultural, vibrant society. So, yeah, I mean, Andy Burnham's an interesting one because, you know, I've actually questioned Andy Burnham on the Old Trafford regeneration because he works, or was working closely with the Ratcliffe sort of project with regard to that. So again, for him to turn around and say that, to sort of say, you know, retract it, you know, this sort of colonisation by immigrants is so emotive. And, you know, if you ask me a slightly different question, do I think he chose his words carefully? Yes, I do, because Ed very carefully asked him if he meant that word, and he repeated it. So, you know, he has to take responsibility for what he says. He's allowed his opinion. I'm not here to say that him having an opinion is wrong, but I think we're allowed to debate whether, you know, the actual opinion in itself is problematic, and I would suggest it is for all the reasons we're discussing. And so, yeah, I mean, let's see what the sort of next fallout is from this. But unfortunate is the word I would use. And as I keep on saying, I'm being polite, you know. But I was at the Manchester City game yesterday evening, covering that when the interview broke, and I think I put it on X, credited Sky News, and the adjective or the word I used was "wow," as if to say, hello, you know, exactly what do you mean by this? Who is it aimed for?
And it's completely legitimate, like you say, that there is a very live, ongoing conversation across society about migration and immigration, and there are many thoughts, feelings, views, opinions from a variety of angles. I'm interested just for your final thought on the fact that Sky News understands that the FA are taking a look at the comments made. What might that process look like? And if you're able to give any insight as to kind of what options the FA has if they decide they want to undertake them, what could potentially be coming from kind of the football authorities?
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit Emperor's New Clothes in that, you know, they're not going to dock the team points or anything like that. So I'm guessing it might be a reprimand at best. I mean, how do you hurt a sort of a multi-billionaire? You know, where it hurts, I suggest it's very, very difficult. But I think it is good that, don't get me wrong, I think it is good that they're looking at this, because that's saying to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, look, you know, we're going to have a look at this because it's not necessarily great for our game. And so, yeah, I mean, I would guess it's a rap on the knuckles type of thing, if I'm being completely honest. But I think in and of itself, that would be fair enough. It's, you know, it's still sort of being seen to act by the FA. And at least, as you know, we are discussing this, and what it allows is for people like me and other people to sort of give a different point of view. And I suppose in that way, I'm sure that's not why he said it originally. I suppose in that way, at least we are able to have this debate and sort of say, hold on a minute here, not too sure that this is correct.
And with regards to the sport itself, and the side itself, you know, Man United were almost going to have 5 consecutive wins. They were pipped to that. They kind of got 4 in a row and then a draw. What does the impact of owners' and managers' comments have on the side? How legitimate is the impact of those kind of comments? And how does that affect players when they're trying to get their head down and play 90 minutes of good football?
I would guarantee it'll have zero effect on the actual playing product. But someone like me, the next press conference, because they don't have a game because they're out of the FA Cup, Manchester United, they don't have a game this weekend. So the next game, I think, is Monday week. So the next time I will be able to see Michael Carrick, who's the interim manager, I believe will be Friday week. And this may well come up, just kind of, you know, what do you think of what your minority owner said? And, you know, you have got players from all over the world. You know, was it unfortunate? That's the sort of thing where it will have an impact. And, you know, whatever Michael Carrick says, I'm sure he'll try and downplay. Whatever he says will be valid. But I think that is a valid, or these are valid questions. You know, as we're saying, we have players from all around the world, amazing footballers in the squad. And if you are there and look at those comments, well, you know, you may well be upset or bemused or whichever sort of characterisation of it. And again, that would be valid. So I don't think it will have any impact materially on the actual quality of play. But I think, you know, these are human beings. You know, they will have different experiences. Who knows sort of what difficulties or otherwise, you know, some of these players may have had. So again, to read this from your owner is supposed to be showing leadership. Again, pretty unfortunate.
Jamie Jackson, Manchester football writer at The Guardian, joining us live from Manchester. Good to have you with us. Thank you. Lots to just bring you up to speed on. There's got a fair few moving parts in the last hour or so. This is the breaking news that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has now apologised for the statements that were made in that exclusive interview with Sky News yesterday when he was speaking to Ed Conway in Antwerp. Let's just bring you his response. This was posted on the Inos website, and it said, "I'm sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe and caused concern, but it's important to raise the issue of controlled and well-managed immigration that supports economic growth. My comments were made while answering questions about UK policy at the European Industry Summit in Antwerp, where I was discussing the importance of economic growth, job skills and manufacturing in the UK. My intention was to stress that governments must manage migration alongside investment in skills, industry and jobs so that long-term prosperity is shared by everyone. It is critical that we maintain an open debate on the challenges facing the UK." Well, that attempt to have an open debate triggered a big response, both from political leaders and also the football world. Let's listen back to what Sir Jim said when he was speaking to Ed Conway yesterday evening.
If you really want to deal with the major issues of immigration, with people opting to take benefits rather than working for a living, if you want to deal with that, then you're going to have to do some things which are unpopular and show some courage.
And has this government done that?
No, I think they I don't know whether it's just the apparatus that hasn't allowed Keir to do it, or he's maybe too nice. He's a nice. I mean, I know Keir. He's a nice man. I like him, but it's a tough job, and I think you have to do some difficult things with the UK to get it back on track, because at the moment I don't think the economy is in a good. You can't afford. You can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits, and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause. It'll cause. Well, yeah. The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020.
Didn't you?
I did.
Do you think that they would be a good government if they were to win the next election?
I think Nigel is an intelligent man, and I think he's got good intentions, but in a way you could say exactly the same about Keir when Keir came in. But, I think it needs somebody who's prepared to be unpopular for a period of time to get the big issues sorted out, would be my view.
Well, it was a comment that then went to the very top, went all the way to Downing Street, where we can join our political correspondent, Rob Powell, because, Rob, yesterday the Prime Minister criticised those comments, called on Jim Ratcliffe to apologise, and today you've been hearing from the PM spokesperson following that apology.
Yeah, it's been a pretty punchy response from the Prime Minister and from the wider Number 10 team towards Jim Ratcliffe, calling the comments divisive, inaccurate, inflammatory and wrong. There was calls for him to apologise when that statement did eventually come through from Jim Ratcliffe. You got a sense that the Number 10 team was sort of happy with that to an extent. They essentially said, look, the Prime Minister has called for him to apologise, and he has. Whether it was a full apology or not, they said that was basically for Jim Ratcliffe to speak to his own apology. It's interesting, though, I think, that the kind of strength in which they condemned those comments, because actually this is, a Labour government that, when you look at migration policy that is being pushed through by the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood and the Home Office, it would maybe surprise a lot of people in how stringent it is, both on legal migration and on illegal migration. There are big changes being pushed through on indefinite leave to remain, for instance, that do make some Labour MPs and other Labour supporters feel a little queasy. Think back to May 2025 when Sir Keir Starmer was unveiling a migration white paper, and he came under acute criticism from people in his party for using language around the UK risking becoming an island of strangers. People saying that was essentially taking language from the ex-Tory Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech and inserting it into his own comments. Now, he later disowned that language, essentially said that he hadn't seen the parallels in it. And I think the interesting sort of substantive policy question now is, given everything that's happened over the last week or two, the dire situation the government and the Prime Minister has found himself in, the calls that have come from some predominantly on the left of the party, people like Andy Burnham, but also I think you can read into comments coming from people like the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, to adopt maybe a more sort of full-throatedly left progressive Labour agenda and vocabulary. Is this the first evidence of it? Look, I'm not saying it definitely is, and I may well be reading into this too much, but is there any bleed across from this into the actual substantive policy debate around what the government is doing on migration? Because remember, Keir Starmer and the government's position on legal migration is that it has been far too high. They have said that. They have said it should come down. It is coming down. They agreed with a lot of the Tory reforms that were put through under the last government to cut down on things like the number of dependents that people can bring across if they're coming to work in the NHS. They've essentially moved the goalposts for quite a few people that came legally to the country to work, would have expected to get their indefinite leave to remain, their settled status basically, and have now pushed it back to try and combat what they see as an experiment in uncontrolled borders, as it's put by the Prime Minister and by the Labour government. They have been putting those reforms through to fight back against it. So, look, this is not a Labour government that has essentially always struck such a maybe more traditionally left-wing tone on migration. On this, they clearly believe the comments made by Jim Ratcliffe were wrong. They believe that the numbers that he is basing the comments off are inaccurate. They believe that his tone and his language around colonising the UK is inflammatory and divisive. I guess the open question looking forward to where Keir Starmer and the government goes is this just a sort of singular response to these comments, or does this represent something deeper and more profound in terms of a tilt further towards the left? And then does that have a bleed across into the actual practical policies being put out by Shabana Mahmood and the Home Office to curb immigration?
Rob Powell joining us live from Downing Street. Really good to have you with us. Plenty more from Rob and all our correspondents being brought together on the Sky News website and the Sky News app. Also a bit from our data team with regards to UK population growth. The figures that Jim Ratcliffe cited were misquoted by him. We've got the full details of population growth in the UK. We've also got full details of the political reaction as well, including from Ed Davey, the Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and Sir Keir Starmer. Plenty more details to come with Jane Secker in 2 minutes' time.